Richard. I saw your surname and I thought Richard's got a very female voice.
Yeah. To be fair, I did exactly that when I thought Richard, and then started to thought, oh, maybe sign in with a different account. Then realised that it must be the surname. Right. So we've obviously I've been doing this for a few weeks now. Going through them all right from the beginning, and obviously the other resources and the videos from them are on YouTube if you want to have a look and see what's going on. So the main bit that we've been doing over the last few weeks is looking at the programming techniques. So we've covered things like the sequences, selection, iteration, a little bit of string manipulation, looking at arrays, and looking at kind of how to make maintainable code, and obviously data types and the different operators come into all of that. So today I just thought we'd look at going through how to access files and to be able to read from files and to write to files as well. So I'll skip. Actually, no, I won't skip past this because obviously we've got someone that hasn't joined before. So this is kind of just some general advice that I give to my students once they get to writing exam kind of algorithms. We teach in Python, and up until the end of kind of learning to program, they'll just write in Python. And when I'm setting them exams, I just say to write in Python, and that's fine. Obviously, once it starts to get nearer the exam side of things, and they're starting to write exam papers and algorithms ready for the exams, I then start to introduce this idea of a pseudocode type language, which really just stays as Python as far as I'm concerned with the students. I just tell them just to write their functions in capital letters, just to make them stand out and make it easy for the students to, or the examiners to read. And what it also means is that it doesn't look exactly the same as Python, and so they can get away with kind of making up function names, if you like. If there's something that they can't quite remember what it is, they can kind of make up a descriptive function name like max or min, something on those lines, and they can use that within their program and not have to worry too much about it. I think if they worry too much about how things are written, then they're not necessarily going to get full marks in the exam. So it's just about trying to get them into the habit of just thinking generally, as long as it's clear for someone to follow and understand, then they don't need to worry too much about it. But those keywords in capitals just helps to make it stand out as we go through and mark them, really. You can really clearly see where the function names and so on are. I'm a really big user of Prim, as people that have followed these before will realise. It's a really useful way to teach programming, and we'll look at those, and that's how I tend to go through with these sessions as well. So it's this idea of getting students to predict what they think is going to happen, then running the code, then giving them some questions to investigate the code a little bit further, so they can really start to understand what's going on, and then they have a chance to modify and make their own code. And it's this idea of having some code that's not theirs to begin with, moving towards code that is theirs. And this is how we kind of set it up in a lesson. They'll have 3 or 4 of these per kind of section, if you like. We don't necessarily do them as individual lessons, more as kind of areas to cover. So if we're looking at iteration, it might take some of the students 2 or 3 lessons to go through it. But it's really important that they do go through the whole thing. So if it takes them a little bit longer, then that's fine. So with kind of using Prim, I'll just go through looking at some code based around reading to start off with. So before the students will start to have a look at the code, I'll give them a little bit of an insight into some of the functions. So I would talk through what the open function is used for, and the fact that it has these two parameters that we pass in, the file name and the method, and that we talk about doing that. I'd introduce kind of one way of going through and getting the contents from the file, and then we'd talk about using the close function to then close the file at the end. But that's really about all that I'd talk through. The rest I'd get them to see what they can work out as they go through. So obviously it would be a chance for them to just take a few minutes to sit and predict it. Feel free to have a think about it and what you think it might do. The next step would then be to actually copy that code down and run it. And so the code can be copied in. Some methods of prim get them to actually just give them the file, but I tend to prefer to get them typing the code because it just gets them into the habits of writing some code. If you do want to write some code, oh, it looks like we've just got someone else join us. Didn't realise that. If you do want to write some code, then obviously because we're dealing with reading from a file, I have got a file that you can use that is the text file. What I will just do, don't know if can everyone see the chat function okay?
Martin?
Yes.
So I was interested in the IDE you use. You said, I've forgotten the name of it.
So I use Thonny.
Thonny, that's it. You said that was really good. With your GCSE groups, does that work well with file management? Because one of the things that's always put me off IDEs is how they slightly hide, some of the online ones, sorry, the web browser-based ones, is how they slightly hide the file handling aspect.
No, Thonny works in exactly the same way as the regular Python idle. Really, it's just how it's laid out. So it's one you have to install. It's an add-on really for Python, for your regular Python kind of code. So when they go to save it, it works in exactly the same way.
That's brilliant. So they're using the network.
Yeah,
and
so
saving
just
things to get and folders. That's great.
Yeah, so it just saves it all there, and obviously they have to go through and do it in that way.
Thank you.
So if you do want the files, I have put in a link in the chat. I don't know if that has shown up at all.
I can't get the chat. I think
you can't get the chat.
No.
I'll tell you what I'll do as well then. There you go. That's the link as well. Obviously, you can't click on that one and just take you there. But that's got the presentations from the previous ones, and then there's 2 text files in there as well that you can then use if you want to do some of the code. And obviously, you don't have to, don't feel free, but I think I tend to find it easier to play around when I'm learning something new to begin with.
Well, thank you.
But with this, has anyone got any ideas what this is going to do? Anyone think they managed to work it out?
Adds the contents of the file to the variable contents.
Yep. So we're looking at a file called text file, and we're using the read method, which is what the R is all about, and we're going through and adding the contents. There is another way of doing it. So there is a read function, which if you go through and use that one, it does virtually the same thing without having to use the loop. The reason that I tend to teach my kids to use the loop method is just because it allows them to kind of manipulate lines of the file if they need to, rather than just having one kind of long list of data to use, and so they can access particular rows if they need to, which if they're using text files, they tend to use them especially when they're doing the code, and if they're doing like project-based things, they might use it to save some high scores, for example. If they just read in the file, then they don't necessarily have that ability very easily to go through kind of each line of the text file. Whereas if they use the loop method, obviously the code within the loop could be anything, and that could be looking at just displaying it line by line, or maybe looking at which has got the highest score, and you can do that just a little bit more easily by using this method. So then obviously it comes down to kind of looking at getting them to investigate. So these kind of questions are there to look at what is actually going on. So we've already mentioned that the contents variable is storing whatever is in the text file. As I mentioned, that R means that we have opened the file ready to read from the file. And obviously there's other methods that we'll look at a little bit later on. Any ideas what might happen if we try and just print the my file variable?
It will display the contents line by line.
You might think so, but it won't actually. So if I just, I won't do it with this one, I'll do it with the actual, that's the right one. So if we just try and print my file, then what actually happens is we get this bit displayed. So that's the result of my printing the my file, and that's because it's my file isn't actually a regular data type as such. It's more of an object, and that object is kind of something that can then be used and accessed, but you can't actually display anything from it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's just something to get them to think about, just so they realise that they can't just print this straight away. And then the overall purpose of the program is obviously something that we just get them to think about, and why we might use that. So this is obviously just going to display everything that is in that text file. Obviously this close function is quite important as well. You can get away with not doing it, but it just tidies things up and stops lots of data being kind of floating around and getting away. So as you start to get large files, if you keep opening external files and leaving them open, then you're going to be affecting kind of the computer's memory. And kind of more from an exam point of view, there's normally a mark for closing the file once you've dealt with it as well. So there's obviously a couple of different things in there that you just need to think about, but obviously there's the coding viewpoint, and also there's the exam viewpoint as well. Any questions about that at all?
Question. In Microsoft Teams, how
Yes.
do you get rid of that irritating toolbar that keeps placing it? I've looked everywhere. The floating toolbar that doesn't seem to move.
Are you talking about the one you can see on my screen?
No, the one on my screen that's got things like record or video, which floats always floats right in the middle of your Python code.
Sorry, maybe I need to think about doing that.
No, don't worry about it. I just thought it was something idiotic I wasn't doing.
No, it normally fades out if you don't.
Yeah, mine's not fading out. I looked it up and it said, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I'll look it up again afterwards.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just thought maybe
right.
mine doesn't fade out for some reason, even when I've moved my cursor. Sorry.
So no, sorry about that. It's not
right in the middle of the code and it's doing my noggin in.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Sorry about that.
No, it's not your fault, Martin.
Well, I've put my code right in the middle of it.
Unless you're a Microsoft developer.
So no, I'm not. Not that good. So yeah, so see, that's a kind of an introduction to kind of reading. See, from there, then we look at getting the students to then have some modify and make tasks. So we tend to do something that's quite similar. The modify is something that allows them to, in this case, use some of the string manipulation techniques. So looking at using concatenation that we looked at a little while ago, just to add in some line numbers that they can add to the code. And so they're just going to create their own version and hopefully just modify it slightly. And that modification is kind of that next step to being able to create their own code. From there, then they need to just then create a whole new program. So in this case, it's pretty much exactly the same file, but I'm getting that program, but I'm getting them to use a different file this time, and make sure they create it with a different number on each line, and then it's just going to go through and display all the numbers and add together the total for it as well, and display that total. And so it then allows them to kind of look at how they make their own text files that can then be used by Python, obviously, to go through and read some data from it. Any questions about any of those tasks and how they might approach them at all? Excellent. We'll just go back slightly. So this is, if I just go through, because earlier on I mentioned about using the read option instead. And so my version here, I've commented out the loop side of things, and I've used the read function, so you can just see how that might look instead. I see that's possibly a more easy way to understand, especially for some of your lower ability. And I think when it comes to the exams as well, that's all they're going to be looking for doing. They're not going to necessarily be looking at editing what's going on inside the file, so they're probably not going to worry too much about that. Typically, I think it would just be a case of opening the file, reading from the file, closing from the file, and in which case that's probably a much simpler method to use that you might choose to use with your learners instead. Okay. The next step is then just to go through and look at using arrays with the loop as well, and with the file. So a lot of the data can be read in and turned into an array, which allows the user to kind of access it a little bit more easily. So here we've just got a numbers file that we've created. Again, get the learners to go through and study the code, write down what they think might happen to begin with before they can have a go at running the code to see whether they are right or not. In this case, because obviously there's files, it tends to be useful to get them to have a look inside the content files as well, so they know what's being read in. Obviously with this one, it's not particularly clear exactly what will happen, but has anyone got a rough idea of what might happen with this? No. So with this one, what will happen is the numbers that are in the text file will be read in kind of line by line and added into our numbers array that we've got here. They've got various bits and pieces that help to make that happen. So firstly, obviously we've got the text file being opened. We've created an array that we're going to use. We've got a counter that allows us to then use the right location in the array as we go through. So initially we're going to put it into item number 0, and then we're going to add 1 onto that, so it goes into place 1, then place 2, and then place 3, and so on. The int function is used around the row to convert our number into a kind of an integer, so that we could then use some maths if we wanted to later on. And so once we then get that done, we'll have an array that's got all of our numbers in. And I think, have it open so you can have a look if you haven't had a chance to type it out yourself. So when I run this program, fine, it's all working. So we've got obviously the array that's being displayed. And so all of the numbers, so these are the numbers that were in the text file, they're now in an array that we can then use, and obviously that kind of links into what I'll have been doing with them before, which is what we were looking at last week when we started to introduce using arrays so that they can then obviously be accessed, and we can then do whatever we want to later on with those. Okay. Any questions about that so far?
Martin?
Yes.
What does that look like in the, sorry, I haven't got time to set it up, but what does that look like in the text file?
Yep, I can
is that only stored in, is that a data structure in memory? Sorry.
Right. So this is the text file. So obviously that you've got access to that if you want to at a later point. So it's just a text file that's got the numbers from 2 to 7 in there.
So that's interesting. In an array, it always stores it on a new line, does it? Is that generally what happens?
So what, in the text file?
Yeah, if you're using an array structure, or
so what's happened is the data is basically being retrieved from this text file.
Yeah.
So in the text file, obviously we've got a different number on it, a different line. I've done that just so that it's easier to go through and access. There are ways that you can split it up so that, let's say I had each of these on so all the numbers on the same row and they were split by a comma.
Yeah, that's what I expected to see. That's what slightly confused me.
Yeah, so you can do that, and then you could then kind of explode each item, if you like, split them all up based on that comma. The reason I've just done it this way is just because it's a little bit easier for the students to be able to manipulate, because all they're using is a loop in this case. So I just did it on different lines, but they can obviously use that and start to kind of understand how things are working, and they can then move on and start to use things like split, which I think is, from memory, one of the lessons that I use. I'm just going to have a quick check.
Oh, that's quite a nice introduction. Okay, sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, so this example here uses the split method. So I've got some data in this text file where they've got name and I've got a score, and it's split based on the colon. And so I do show them using the split function to be able to split it up, and then that creates an array on its own that is kind of got the first name and although it's got the name and then the score as separate values within the array. But this is obviously, as I've had in previously, this is on the CAS website, and you can download the OneNote files and use it as much as you want. So it's not protected at all, and you can edit them and do what you want with them. Yeah, so obviously as it goes through, and if I just go into the debug mode, you'll be able to see a little bit more. So over here on the right, you've got the variables. They might be quite small. I don't know if you can change the size of those ones. But as we go through, so we were reading the text file, okay, and then we're going in. We've created our array that's got our numbers in. We've got our variable that's got 0 in, and so now as I go through my loop, I'm going through each item, so it's found the 2, and then it's going through, it's converting that 2 into an integer, so we just got the number 2, and it's assigning that to the numbers variable, and obviously we can see that over here. And then obviously we're adding 1 onto the count, so that we then get to 1 with the count, and then we go through for all of the others. And using the debug tool is quite nice to be able to see exactly how it's working. Okay, does that all make sense? And then obviously you've got the investigator, so the code is in a slightly different place now, so hopefully that's all right for everyone. So thinking about why count is needed in here, so thinking about the purpose of it. So I think I mentioned that earlier on. It's there so that we can then change the place in numbers that we're assigning the number to, so we don't just try and put the number in the same kind of spot in the array and just overwrite each number each time. Line 5, obviously explained that part as well earlier on. And then if we move line 6 before line 5, any ideas what might happen? No. So if our count incrementer was before here, our count starts at 0, but straight away before we do anything with count, we're adding 1 onto it. So count would then become 1. So the number 2 would start in here. See if I can use a pen just to highlight it a little bit. So this would change to 2. And then this one would be 3, then this would be 4, then this would be 5, and then this would be 6. And then we'd get an out of range problem because we've got nowhere for 7 to go because we've got to the end of the list. And so then we'd get an error message at that point. So 2 to 6 would all go in as normal. We'd have this 0 that stays there, but then we'd have nowhere for 7 to go afterwards. Does that make sense? And that's just added just so to give the students an idea of what happens. And every so often, I think it's really good to give them a program or give them an investigation that you know is going to cause some errors, so they're getting used to seeing different types of error messages as much as possible. And hopefully then they can learn what caused the error so they can then fix them in the future. And we get them to use an error log that they fill out every time they do find an error message. The error log, if I can find it, is just a very simple table that we get them to fill out and that they can then just use as a little bit of a dictionary later on. So they get them to have a screenshot of the error so they can obviously see and remember the full error message, a description of what it means, because obviously the Python errors aren't particularly clear. And then what they did to fix it, or what they need to do to fix it in the case of some of them. And then obviously we've got the modify and the make tasks within that as well. So as again, the modifier is quite similar, so it's just doing the same as what it was doing, but rather than just putting the number in the array, it's going to multiply the number by 2 each time. And then obviously the make task, I'm getting them to do it using a subprogram. So again, going back to what we've been doing previously, so when we were looking at the maintainable programming and we were looking at functions and procedures, get them to do a similar sort of thing with this one, and get them to use the same tools that they have been using as they go through. Any questions about any of that? Excellent. Then get them to move on. So this would be a new part because we'd now be looking to move on to using the write method instead. So this kind of goes back to kind of a more simple example, and this I think is the first one where we're looking at writing to the program. So I would mention the same function, so we still use this open function and obviously the close function at the end. We're still using the parameters, but one of the parameters is now changed, so from the read method to the write method. And we then explain about that. And again, that's about as far as I go before I then chuck them in and get them to have a go. Obviously predicting what they think these bits of code might do, and then obviously actually writing it and then running it. So hopefully we can work out what this is doing. Have we got some ideas of what this might do? So with this one, obviously we're opening up a file again, and this one is the definitions.txt. We're saying we want to be able to write to it, and then each of these lines would then just write the text that's in the brackets to the file. So we're doing two bits of text that we're going to add to the file, and then we're going to close it. What do we think this is doing, the \n? Why do we have that in there?
The new line.
Yeah.
So 2 lines.
Yeah. So otherwise we'd have everything all on the same line, which might not be particularly useful when we're trying to read from it later on. This is a little bit of an interesting one that I get them to think about. So in here, I get them to think about where the files come from, because I don't give them a file called definitions.txt for this one, like I do when we're reading from them. And so it's useful to get them to think about what's actually happening. So Python will create a file if it doesn't exist, regardless of what you're doing. So even if you're reading from it, it would create a file first. See, if it creates a file, there'll be nothing in it. So it's not very useful to do that when you're trying to read from a file, because you need to have something there initially. But obviously when you're writing to a file, it doesn't matter. You don't necessarily have to have it created already before you then actually have access to it. And then what I get them to do is to run it again, but just having different definitions in there, and then have a look at the text file afterwards. Does anyone know what might happen if you just run it again with different definitions?
Will it just write over the top of it?
Yeah. So the write method writes over the top of it.
Yeah.
So you can get away with writing multiple lines, but once you've kind of closed the file and then you run the program again and open the file again, it will just rewrite over the top of it. And there may be applications for doing that. So let's say you're doing a save file for a game. You don't necessarily need to add to the end of it. You might just overwrite whatever is already there, which is fine. And it's just getting them used to the fact that this write method is a write over the top, and it won't actually add anything to the end of it. And obviously for that one we'd need a different method. The modify and the make tasks, again, obviously they're quite simple. Obviously you can see I've used this as a little bit of a revision. So from when we were looking at sequences, selection, iteration, and the different computational methods, obviously use those, and I try and get those terms in as much as possible and get them to keep using the definitions as much as possible, just so that they really do know them. And again, I've got a new one which is very similar to the modify, where they're just going to do some more definitions as well. Any questions about that at all? Anything anyone doesn't understand?
That's brilliant.
Okay. And then the final one, so this would be another new lesson, or new section, I should say, where we introduce the A method. This one is very similar to write, so I don't believe I normally talk much about it, apart from the fact that there's a different method and that it's A instead of the W. And then I get them to have a look at what's going on. So this is a fairly complex program compared to some of the others that we've had so far. So get them to think about what's going on here when we've got a number of tests that we need to add to begin with, a loop to go through every single one of those tests, and then every time they go through, it's going to ask for a student name and a student score, and then look at writing all of that to a line on the file. And obviously we're ending it with a new line so that every single time it goes to a new line. Obviously we've got our concatenation going on in here as well. Even though we've got obviously numbers, but those numbers are being treated as strings. And so we've got all of these bits going on that are just trying to help them to go through. The A is append. Okay? So it's going to add to the end of it rather than replacing it. And so what happens this time, and obviously this is where the similarities drawn with the previous part, where they're thinking, okay, well, maybe it overwrites over the top of it, but hopefully they'll see that if they run it a second time, then they'll have, I don't know, if, let's say they had 5 tests to begin with, and they did it another 5 tests, obviously they'd have the 10 tests, rather than just overwriting the 5 tests that were already there. And obviously this one is a little bit more useful in terms of what they might want to use it for. So if they're trying to create like a high score generator or things like that, obviously they can append to the end of it rather than overwriting them, because you don't necessarily want to overwrite the high scores. And then obviously get them to think about the construct. So every so often I'll have an activity where I put that in there just to get them thinking about where the constructs are used, because I think that's something that's quite often asked within the exams. Which constructs have been used? Can they identify them, or can they just explain what they mean? And obviously just trying to get them to do that every so often. And I'll always put questions like that when we do assessments as well. There'll always be these types of questions where they've got some code and they've got to identify where things are being used within programs as well as they go through. Any questions about that at all?
Martin, where
Yes.
you teach using Python, so
Yeah.
for example, where you've got for I in range,
Yeah.
when do you tackle some of the other syntax that they might see in the exam?
So that would be once I'm starting to get them used to writing and looking at exam type questions. So at the moment we teach all of Python in year 9. So we've got a 3-year key stage 4 at the moment.
Of course you have, yeah.
Which is very nice, and we're losing it, and I'm going to be very gutted, because year 9 is just about programming, nothing else. They're just learning to program, which is nice to have that time to do. Once they've finished doing that, then we start to introduce the fact that things will look different within the exams. And what I would then start to do is I'll talk about how it might be different, and then I'll start to write my algorithms questions in OCR type pseudocode. So they then start to get used to seeing that. Obviously they don't have to write in that themselves, and so they
need
can
to recognise it, don't they?
And so that's where it's going to change from how I write the questions, and so we'll do it within lessons and homework tasks and things like that. I will tend to do in a pseudocode type language. It won't always be exactly the same as OCRs, because I think actually it helps them to be able to see different ways of doing it. So however it's written, they understand it, and that just, I think, helps them to see that there's different ways of writing it and it all means the same thing. But I won't really write questions in Python after they're finished learning to program.
Yeah.
So at the end of this, they won't do really any writing in Python as such, but they can obviously write their answers in Python.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
No worries.
I would just need to plan that into my schemes, probably make sure that I've got that transfer.
Yeah, I'll see what I've got for those ones, because I've probably got loads as well that I've already got. So I'll have a look and see.
And
if
I've not even
there's-
looked at the new reference code yet, so
The new reference code isn't really any different.
I'm assuming it wouldn't be that different.
No, there's people kicking up a really big fuss about it, and I can't see why. I honestly don't understand what some people have found as such a big problem with the fact that they've introduced this OCR reference language. It's no different to what they used to call OCR pseudocode. I think I've got it open actually.
People loathe change. I find it at work. Oh, at the moment, yeah.
I just like there's things to moan about, but that's not one of them. Like, it's not a huge change. There's very little. There's very little, I think, to worry about with it, and so I just listen, I really don't get it at all. I have had this open recently, but I can't remember if I've saved it.
Don't worry about it. Oh, well, the others might want to see it, of course.
This is just where you can see how many different things I've been working on recently. I just haven't been organising anything at all because it's just so
soothing to see other people's directories as messy as mine.
Yeah. Well, I don't really use offline much. I tend to use like my cloud storage all the time. But then there's certain things, especially at the moment, where it just makes things easier to have an offline version. So I then just download them, and then they just end up in my downloads all the time. There we go. Here it is. There we go. The OCR reference language. So really, it's no different to if you have a look at any of the papers that they've used in the past. It's just what they write in. They haven't changed anything at all. The only, obviously, there's some bits that are a little bit different. So when they're dealing with loops, in terms of how it's different to Python, it's 0 to 9 inclusive, rather than kind of that would stop at 8 if it was a Python loop. And see, but this is how they've always written in them. They've introduced switches in there, which I think that is a new one that they haven't looked at it previously.
Oh yeah.
It might have been in the old one. I can't remember.
We did have case switch, yeah.
Yeah, it was in there. Sorry. Yeah. So if you compare it to how it was, it's identical.
Hardly any different, is it?
There's no difference at all, obviously, apart from the layout of it. So
it's clearer now.
It's why I don't understand why there's been such a fuss about it. This is just what they've always had, but they've just given it a different name because they're saying, right, this is our language that we're going to write questions in, and this is our high level language. And then pseudocode is kind of how the kids are going to be writing, because they're not going to write in this reference language half the time. They'll use kind of Python or a combination of Python in their own made up thing, and that's fine, as long as the examiner can understand what they're talking about.
The logic of what they're
then
doing.
they're going to get marks.
Yeah.
They're not going to be marked down because they've forgotten to put a colon in the if statement or whatever it might be. Even though there are questions in the new one, they say, well, they're going to be expected to write in a high level language or in OCR reference language. There's still going to be leniency. They're still going to say, well, you've missed out on brackets, a set of brackets. That's fine. It makes sense. We'll give you the marks. It'll
still be that they'll be looking for that logic.
Yeah.
And if logic is there, And like you say, it makes sense.
Yeah.
They'll still get the mark.
The only ones where there will be problems is if they miss speech marks around strings or
Yeah.
put speech marks around variables. That's something they've always been hot on because that doesn't make sense. And I think that's completely reasonable.
Yeah.
If they don't have consistent naming, so they put subject with a capital S instead of a lowercase s,
System
again, those things are things that are important. But missing out a bracket, or so if they don't use a bracket for using an input or a print or whatever it might be, they won't get marked down for it, as long as it's clear. So yeah, so that's, I think that's that really. It's fairly straightforward. And obviously from there, then I'd just give them another modifier make task that is based around there. And that's really about it in terms of file handling. I think I spend about there's 3 parts to it, so we tend to spend maybe 4 to 5 lessons going through that, and just how it works, and then obviously they'll then do some more with it when it comes to exams as well. But like I said, there's obviously all of these resources that I've created. So if I just go to the file handling ones, so this is the first lesson. I'll see where I took the initial bits from, and obviously you can see I put the text files in there. Here's the second one again. They don't have it, so this one is just looking at the write method, and then you've got the third one in there, which obviously is looking at the append method. And like I said, that probably takes about 4 to 5 lessons to go through. Any questions from anyone? So that's always nice when you get to the end and everyone's happy enough that they don't need any questions or anything. So yeah, that's really about it. Obviously, I'll carry on with these for the foreseeable future. I think next week we'll have a look at some databases as it links in with it, and then go from there, really.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Not a problem. Hopefully it was an all right use of your bank holiday.
Yeah, we're good, aren't we?
So,
Yeah, 60,000 virtue points.
Yeah.
I'm so tempted to send some emails today.
Yeah.
I saw this on my CPD. One of those teachers.
Brilliant.
Martin,
Yes.
could I ask you, it's about A-level projects. Did you teach A-level?
Yes, we do, yeah.
I assumed you did. One of the things that I'm finding is that because we're not doing proper coursework anymore in year 11, either they've not really bought into the coursework in GCSE. So we've had a huge problem this year with our year 13s. Luckily, their coursework wasn't the end of everything. Obviously, I shouldn't discuss anything like that. But what we did find is their ability to get going on the coursework and put a project together was so poor. And I'm thinking about, so this year with my year 12 doing a starter project, one in VB. We can offer them the Craig and Dave thing as well because they've got resources. But the other thing I wanted to put together was like a mini kind of database. Python-based project, you know, so they can do a practice one. Do you remember the old Heathcote books we used to give them? Did you use those ever?
No.
When we taught applied A-level, the Heathcotes books, they're the guys from PG Online. They would have all these mini projects that the kids could kind of just follow through, and you give them a couple of those, and then they go away and develop their own database project. So I'm thinking about getting my year 12s to do a mini project with a GUI, a database, and a couple of algorithms that take that data, do some searching and sorting, you know, one that's all step by step, and then to let them bounce off that to create their own projects.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how you tackle your A-level, getting them going, because we're really finding a skills deficit now in that GCSE. We were absolutely stunned this year at how poor they were at putting things together.
Yeah, it definitely has a difference. I mean, we notice the biggest problem with school, like kids that come from other schools to us, because I was quite mean because I didn't tell my kids that it didn't count until afterwards, so that they thought, so they put the effort into it. There was one year, actually I think it might have been this year's year 13. They were the year that I did actually tell, because that was when it came out halfway through.
But for the year that were told, and they lost their teacher, so we had a double whammy.
I mean, what we've done is we have changed from doing the project in year 13 to doing the project in year 12.
Yes, that's what we'd been doing, starting it now.
Yeah. No, but we do it right at the very beginning of year 12. So we don't offer the chance to do an AS anymore. They just do a full A level with us. And since we've switched to that, the quality of the project has been a lot better.
And are you doing it over 1 or 2 years?
So they still have the same amount of time. So before, we'd give them from like now, well, we'd start at the end of Easter and they'd have till Christmas. So they'd have about 6 months or so for it. And now they have from September till about the Easter holidays. So they've still got about the same amount of time to do it. If maybe a little bit less than they had before, but the quality at the first hand in has been a lot better, and we haven't had to do as much kind of chasing up as we've had in the past, and I think potentially that's just to do with the fact that they're coming straight into it, and that's what they do straight away, and so they haven't necessarily forgotten those skills.
How many hours a week did you give them doing that?
So we do 5 hours a week in lessons that they have, and that's it. So we don't really do any theory side of things.
Oh, so you just did project.
So yes,
I can't do that because my school is still offering optional AS.
Yeah.
So if they want to do, because we're still doing 4 subjects, and if they want to do AS, but obviously I don't know how long that will carry on. So you actually you do the project for every lesson, get some momentum going on it.
Yes. So if I just so we just do kind of the project. We kind of do a little bit to begin with. So the first few weeks, first couple of weeks or so, we give them a little bit of guidance around things. And so the guidance would be things like looking at what the project is, so they start to come up with some ideas. We then do, because most of the kids tend to do like a database type project. There's something around databases in there. So we do Mia's Sandwich Shop, which we stole from one of the old OCR resources, which works quite nicely.
That's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm after, something like that.
So that, I don't know if I've got it. This should be it.
Mia's Sandwich Shop.
Yeah, Mia's Sandwich Shop. I would imagine you can find it fairly. Here we go. So basically, it's just this scenario that they work through, and you can get. I don't know if I've got the online version somewhere. I probably have, but it'll take me ages to find it. But basically, it's this idea that there's this woman that owns a sandwich shop, and she at the moment does everything on paper. So the order clerk will take an order over the phone for the next day's deliveries and write them all down, and there might be some mistakes, or people have got to try and read the handwriting, and you just get them to act it out initially. And then once we've got that done, and so I give them about 20 minutes or so to have a bit of fun with that one, and they have a little bit of fun doing some role playing. They then move on to then having a go answering some questions. So we look at kind of how it all works. and kind of what needs to happen, and we kind of have a bit of a discussion, and then we create kind of a flat file database. So we're starting to introduce some of the terms behind it, so we just get them to do that in a spreadsheet. So they'll just create a spreadsheet that's basically a copy of the order clerk's sheet, but we can then talk about the fact that it's got slightly easier to read writing, so we haven't got that to worry about. If someone phones back and has changed an order, then there's no ugly crossings out, it's just been deleted and written over. So we can talk about the advantages of that. But then we talk about the things like the redundant data that's in there, the fact that addresses are being written out multiple times, and those sorts of things. So we're getting those terms in there, so they're starting to realise that kind of flat file databases are useless in most cases. And then we start to use like get them to create relational databases, explaining why they do that, get them to start thinking about ER diagrams, which are obviously useful in their projects. Get them to do data dictionaries, so they're thinking about, okay, so I need this data, what data types are there, and then we get them to actually create it, and we look at using the SQL to do it.
What do you create it in your database?
So we use DB Light browser, so this one, which is quite nice to use. It's a free bit of software that's relatively easy to use, and you can either execute the SQL, so you can just write some SQL for it, or you can just browse the data and you can add new records in, just using kind of a...
So you're not structuring it in Python then and saving it?
Not really at this point, and we don't tend to. I mean, there's nothing to stop you doing it through that way. Because
I feel like I've got you doing a whole other hour, and I feel bad about it.
All right.
Don't worry about it. It's such a nice day as well.
Yeah, it's not a problem.
Sure.
Yeah, no,
you're very generous with your time, so as long as you're sure.
I'm happy to. Yeah, we don't really do anything along those lines, because what we're quite open with the kinds of projects that they can do. I don't know what you're like, but we allow them to choose whichever languages that they want and do whatever type of project that they want. And so if we do it in one language, that it kind of alienates some of the others. So we try and do things where it's a little bit more kind of vague, if you like, and the SQL inside any language is the same. So we talk about the SQL that they'll need, and then we talk about how they would then apply it. And so we can then give individual help if people need it. Okay, so how do I do this in this language? But I mean, year 12, we've got PHP, we've got C, and we've got Python in there.
Yes,
and all
mine have done C, and some have done Python, and we do VB as well, because one of my teachers. But I found in Python, I think they needed more support to really know how to integrate a database, because if you can't do much data handling, you can't do a very good project.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, what we do is, so this is kind of bits that we kind of distribute to them. So when it comes to
pages and stuff,
so there's just pages that we give them on guidance on, and then we'll give them some examples.
Well.
And then we've got things like using, I need to tidy this up because it's not particularly great, but these are all kind of tutorials that will help them for PHP.
So you actually do keep it quite open then, and then let them run away. And
we don't. I mean, we've had them do all sorts of different things, and we're quite lucky because we've got 2 teachers that will do the kind of have focus in completely different areas. So my kind of expertise is the Python and the PHP and kind of the web side of things, and he's very much down the C route, and so between the 2 of us, we've got quite a good coverage.
I mean, I think my teacher was was very confident in VB, but the kids don't want to do VB.
Yeah.
Which is a bit of an issue because of its kind of, it's seen as quite old-fashioned. And I think we had some good VB projects that they could start with, and lots of guidance, and then go away and develop.
Yeah.
And I think some of them need somewhere to start. Yeah. And I'd like to integrate the Python with web development and database. So I'm looking for a project that I can show them, those kind of elements combined, a small thing. And some of them went away last year and did C, but they got a lot of support from parents who were C programmers.
Yeah, I think
or a friend.
To do C, you do need to have a lot of support with it. We had one kid, one of our year 13s, he was convinced he was going to go away and do something in C because he wanted to learn it. And then after about 2 weeks of trying to learn it, he just gave up. He was like, there's easier ways to do things than this.
We also let them use hardware this year, but we encountered loads of problems with it because I do a big data project with IoT devices.
Yeah.
So we were going to use IoT, well, they were using IoT devices, but one was just using lots of libraries, machine learning libraries, and we didn't get enough coding out of him. Yeah. And then the other student, his Pi kept blowing up. So this year I'm going to say you can have that, but it's got to be after you've developed an ongoing project.
Yeah.
With so maybe the data is there.
Yeah.
But it's not live data, or it's not.
That's
and then you can go on to bring in the IoTs after that. It's a shame, isn't it? It's just like, it's just some kids need the scaffolding.
Yeah, and they do. I mean, I think there is a big change in things.
Yeah,
now,
we really think
since the project's gone, it's that people don't care about it. I mean, let's say we notice it.
Such a shame. Such a shame they don't do a proper project now.
Yeah.
With the testing and everything, and I just found that kids were doing things so badly because they didn't care.
No, there is. I mean, even though we kind of run loose, we do go through and kind of give them support as they're going through. So we'll give them lots of examples of what we're expecting them to do.
Yeah, I've got that. I think we're good for that, and I've got a nice book from PG Online.
Yeah,
we're good for that. I like the idea of teaching the SQL practically a bit more than this year. Definitely more of that. The SQLite's a good idea.
Yeah.
And but I've not thought to use it this year. But then I've never had planning time.
Yeah, I mean, just a little bit. I mean, the bits that I'm doing next week on databases, they use the SQLite browser as well. And so you can have a look at those and steal some of those, and I think a lot of those can be used at A level as well.
Thank you.
And just adapted and taken further if need be. So
I think I still will put a few mini projects together that they can develop.
I think it is worthwhile doing especially if you think that they need it. I think that's kind of one of the things that we've done in terms of taking those, and I've got a feeling the year 12s that we take kind of next year, we will need to do something a little bit more because they won't have done anything since March.
God, have we heard any decision yet about the coursework element, the 20 hours? For our current year? Current year 10, sorry.
As far as I know, that is still going to be needed.
I don't know how I'm going to do that.
So.
Oh well, we're going to try not to worry too much, haven't we, about things we can't control.
Yeah, I think I don't think they can take it out because a lot of schools will already have done it, and we're one of those schools that has already done it.
That's what I would have been doing now, so I've built up to that, and it's so frustrating.
I think obviously
I'm teaching component 1 because we're not even doing full online lessons. There's no way to get them doing that.
Yeah, I think that's what all schools have got to do. Just do the theory stuff. You can carry on doing it. If you already covered it, you can use it as your revision time. And if you haven't, then you can just about teach it all as it's going through. I mean, we're currently teaching it at the moment, and the kids are the ones that are doing it. They're obviously getting stuff out of it. The ones that aren't, well,
are you a state school or a private school?
State school.
So are you doing online Zooms or?
Yeah, we use Teams for it.
The cameras?
So we're allowed to have our cameras on, but the kids aren't.
Okay.
So it's basically like we've got at the moment here. And it's worked quite well.
And are you scheduling a time for that lesson?
So I've kept them at the moment, although that's going to change once we go back. At the moment, I've got them scheduled at their normal lesson times.
Yeah, because I've noticed I'm rotated to now go in on my normal, because I noticed that's the day I know I'm going to have lots of conversation with them. Mine are we're just emailing, and it tends to be the day we have the lesson, because I think a lot of kids are doing it like that.
Yeah, that's what I said to my kids at the beginning. I was like, well, you've really got to take it in and do it as normal, because otherwise you'll lose that motivation. If you keep to your lessons, you'll find it a lot easier.
Yeah.
And I think on the whole they have. And I think I was saying earlier, I think I've got 4 kids who haven't done anything at all in my year 10 class out of 29.
Yeah, I've got 29. I think I've got about, well, I probably shouldn't talk about school anyway, but I think we've got slightly higher than that. And they're all, and they do tend to be our disadvantaged children. It's really worrying.
That's it. Yeah, I've got, I'm just looking now here, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, there's 4 that haven't done anything at all. And then the rest are doing pretty much everything. There's a few that have
fasting as well last week, so that might improve for some of them, but also access is an issue. Anyway, thank you so much for your time.
Not a problem.
I'm really glad that I got up this morning.
Don't want to waste your time.
Dominate the conversation. It's just like every time you do something, I just think, oh, you've got really good approaches.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the kind words.
Who's your boss at CAS, Martin? Who are you? Who's your line of command there?
What my outreach manager is Wendy.
Just Wendy.
Yeah, Wendy. I think it's McLeod or something. You'll find her quite. She posts a lot on CAS. You'll see her on there.
McLeod?
McLeod, I think it is.
Thank you.
So
I just want to let you know how useful the sessions have been.
Well, that's very kind of you.
I'm going to say that. Is that Bournemouth in the background?
No, this is we did a trip to San Francisco, and this is what I took when we went there. So yeah, I took 20 kids in February. Just
you are a private school.
So no, what we do is it's a 2-year kind of plan, and so I'm planning for the next one, and the parents have to pay about £100 a month for it, and so we've got a fairly decent number of kids that can do that, and we also get some money from the Pupil Premium Fund as well, so they put in kind of a quarter of the cost for it for any of the Pupil Premium kids, which is quite nice.
That's fantastic.
And so yeah, so we've done 2 trips so far since I've been here. So we did one 2 years ago, and then we went back in February this year as well.
Did you go to Silicon Valley then?
Yeah, that's the main aim. So we did the first day we get there. You get there in kind of the afternoon type time, so we just after a long flight just stretch our legs, go to the shop, and then kind of settle in, and then the kids go and take some photos, because where this was taken from our accommodation, so just off outside our accommodation, we've got a really nice view of the Golden Gate Bridge, which is just over my shoulder. I don't know if you can see it, and then you can see Alcatraz as well, so it's quite nice for photos. And then we went to Six Flags on the first proper day, so they can have a little bit of fun. We do a walking tour around San Francisco, which is tiring but well worth it. We've got a really good guide who we've had both times, and I'm hoping we're going to have next time. I'm going to put a request in for him because he's brilliant. The kids love him.
What age? What age are your kids?
We took from year 9 up to year 13.
Yeah, nice to have the older kids. Yeah.
So it took a decent range of kids, and
it's more exciting than Bletchley Park, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the kids love it, and all the kids are like, I want to go again, and they're trying to persuade their parents to let them go again, and that sort of thing. And then kind of the next 2 days is Silicon Valley, so we do Stanford University, have a look around there, which kids quite enjoy. There's a tech museum, which is really good fun. There's the HP garage, which you can go and have a quick look and a photo outside of. And what else is on that? Oh, the Apple Visitor Centre. And then the other day we do Intel, which if you do that, the guided tour is best. You can go around on your own, but we did it on our own first time, and the kids were probably done in about 20 minutes, or the ones that weren't particularly interested were. But then there were some that were really looking into everything, and they kind of took an hour or so. And so some of the kids got a bit bored, so we did a guided tour this time. And obviously he took us to some of the key parts of it and talked about them, and the kids found it a lot more engaging and enjoyed it a lot more, I think. Then we do a quick stop at the NASA gift shop, which is good fun. And then there's a computer history museum there, which Microsoft have ploughed about $10 million into. And so there's all sorts there. It's kind of Bletchley Park on steroids. And then I got a contact at Google, so we get a guided tour around Google as well, squeezed in. And then this time we did Alcatraz on the final day before we left.
Wow.
So yes, it's really good. It's I mean,
is that an organised one, or
so I use diverse school travel, and they kind of organise a lot of the things for me. So they get the flights and they book the tickets and those sorts of things. I just have to kind of say what I want to do, and then they'll just go from there. And they're really good. And if you do decide to go with it and look into it, use me as a quote, and you get a little bit of a discount.
I'll be a bit nervous about planning any travel at the moment.
Yeah, that's it.
We've actually got a local games museum in Sheffield, which apparently is really cute, really good. So
yeah, well, we've got one.
What I've done is put some mini trips in.
Yeah.
So things that we can do quite quickly and cancel without taking huge amounts of money in.
That's it.
That's been a huge problem for our school this year, refunding all the money. And
well, I mean, we got very lucky. I think if we'd been going 2 weeks later, ours would have been cancelled. Because it was literally just as it was starting to take hold, and we really didn't know.
Then?
Yeah, we still went. So it was, like I said, it was very kind of touch and go.
Imagine if you'd been stuck out there with all those kids. Oh my God! And you would have to get back, and you'd have to stay like 2 months.
What a shame! Stuck in California for 2 months
with kids.
I mean, they were all decent kids, to be fair. There's nothing that we could. I wouldn't have worried too much about that, to be fair. No, it was very close. Like I said, I think 2 weeks later, and it would have been called off. Like everything was still kind of open. There wasn't anything to worry about. Chinatown was understandably quiet. Normally it's like really busy, and there was kind of very few people around, which made it quite nice, and obviously got rid of a lot of the risk for us and that sort of thing. And all we did was just had to be sensible and just say, right, just make sure that you're washing your hands regularly. We had like hand sanitizer with us, just in case we couldn't get anywhere to wash hands and that sort of thing. And so there wasn't really any problem with it. But I think, I said, a couple of weeks later, and it would have been called off. We had a ski trip and a trip to Iceland that were called off.
We did as well, a trip to Iceland, Berlin ski trip was.
So those, I mean, they were supposed to go out over Easter, which is obviously why they got cancelled. But yeah,
ski trips, wasn't it? February that bought a lot of it, I think. Actually, to Britain quite early.
Yeah, because there were a couple of ski trips,
isn't it, that we skied in Italy.
Yeah.
Oh well, brilliant. Thank you, Martin, so much for your time.
No worries. And
Sorry, I've asked loads of questions. And
no,
yes,
I think it makes it a bit better if people are asking questions or talking about things, because it's not just me sitting and talking, which is a little bit nicer.
Enjoy your bank holiday. Have a lovely day.
Yeah, and you.
Bye.
Possibly see you next week.